Mark Levinson is the co-chair of the real estate department at the prestigious law firm of Sills, Cummins & Gross. He chairs the firm's Israel Business Practice Group. Mark was appointed by the President of the United States and the United States Commission for Preservation of American Heritage Abroad. And Mark is also the chairman of the New Jersey Israel Commission. Most important to us here at ZOA is that Mark is the national chairman of the board of the Zionist Organization of America. I had the distinct pleasure of working with Mark in our extremely successful campaign to get votes for the ZOA coalition in the WZC election. We're very excited about our opportunity to have influence there. I would like to turn the program over to Mr. Levinson now, and he will start the program. Mark, it's all yours.
Thank you, Alan. Thank you both to you and Natalie for helping, Natalie Lazaroff, our Director of Marketing and Communications, for helping to navigate the administrative aspects of the Zoom program for us today. We're delighted. We're having a very, as you know, we have a very significant series of Zoom presentations on incredibly topical items and very interesting personalities. We've been doing this throughout the pandemic, and frankly, and we've had book clubs and other webinars and discussions of ZOA matters, and the response has been fantastic. The numbers that we see on these webinars encourages us to both continue, and it is really a ratification, validation of everyone's support for ZOA that joins in. So I'm delighted that on a very nice Sunday afternoon, we have a nice turnout today, and I want to turn it over to our really outstanding head of our Israel office, our ZOA representative in Israel, Dan Aluz. Dan is relatively new to the organization, but he's a terrific hire. Mort and I spent quite a bit of time on this, and we're really very, very excited, and it's a significant part of our organization on a going forward basis. Dan is originally from Montreal, Canada. He moved to Israel after finishing legal studies at Harvard of the North, McGill University, and he specialized in international law. He serves as an international law advisor as part of his reserve duty. Dan worked in the International Law Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs as a legislative advisor to the Likud and the Knesset, as well as senior management positions in Israel's third sector. It's my honor and pleasure to invite Dan to really carry us through the first remaining elements of the half an hour of this scheduled 1 hour webinar. Dan.
Thank you so much, Mark. Maybe since, as you mentioned, I'm new to the organization, so I'll start maybe by saying one word about how I see my role in this organization. My role as representative of ZOA in Israel is really to connect between the incredible work that ZOA does in America and what happens here inside of Israel. And I think that's really incredibly important, because at a time when we hear a lot here in Israel about post-Zionist tendencies in parts of the American Jewish community, it's important for us to know that there is still an unapologetic, strong Zionist voice that stands with Israel. For example, if this webinar is about sovereignty, one of the fears against sovereignty here in Israel is that it will cause a rift or a crisis with American Jews. But when we in Israel hear that there is a strong Zionist voice for sovereignty, as we heard when ZOA did a campaign here in Israel about this, it helps us make the right decisions. But enough about me. We really have an amazing speaker here today, so let's focus on her. Attorney Segal is an international law expert, and she is also the director of the International Legal Forum, a nonprofit, proactive legal hub dedicated to global cooperation between lawyers, organizations, and activists from all over the world, fighting against radical ideologies, terror, and the BDS movement. In the years 2013 and 2014, before she created the forum, Ms. Segal was the joint director of Tatzpit Press Service. They did also webinars with the ZOA in the past, the only Israeli news agency disseminating news reports and footage in real time from Israel to media outlets across the world. And previously, prior to 2013, she was also a leading member of Shurat Adin, the Israel Law Center. So Yifa, how are you doing today?
I'm great, thank you. Thanks for inviting me. Good to be here.
So as you heard, the main focus here today is really about the subject of sovereignty. And one of the main arguments against sovereignty in Judea and Samaria for Israel is that it's against international law. Is that true?
I think that, you know, the arguments that claim that the Israeli possession of the territories is illegal are completely disguised as legal arguments. This is, you know, just to give you one example to start with, people use, when I say people, it can be a person on the street, it can be a law student, or it can be a head of state that says illegal occupation, for example, when illegal occupation, it doesn't even exist under international law. There is no such thing as illegal occupation. International law is completely indifferent to occupation, whether it's good or bad. So it's just one example to start with to show you how this is used, basically, I think many times to advance some kind of a political agenda, but it's a lot more convenient to disguise it as a legal argument, you know, that it's illegal and we are criminals and there should be sanctions, rather than to have a real honest political debate, which is, you know, fair enough. Even within the Israeli society, there are different people with different opinions, and that's exactly the point of democracy. But, you know, it's so cynical when they disguise that as a legal claim when nothing really is truly behind that.
So if we speak about Israel's rights to the land of Israel, can you explain to us what the source of these rights is on a legal level?
Yes. Okay. So you want to dive right into that. All right. So look, I mean, the way that I see it, that there are a few sources, and you know, the reason that I say that Israel has you know, thousands of years of history connecting the Jews to this land is mainly as a counter argument when people say when there's an indigenous people, when someone is a native to the land, there is some kind of a right to self-determination that includes independence and sovereignty. And that is also a complete misrepresentation of international law, by the way, but we'll get to that with your permission. I won't start with that. But I will say that, yes, you know, the fact that the Jewish people, at least consistently, have argued for thousands of years to their connection and their presence here in this place does have a meaning, at least as a counter argument. But if you talk about international law, then, you know, everything begins basically not in 1917 with the Balfour Declaration, but in 1920 in the San Remo resolution that came after World War I. And this was the first time, really, that a legally binding, and this is very important, a legally binding resolution was accepted by all, by the League of Nations at the time. This resolution was accepted in the San Remo conference, but then adopted by, you know, unanimously by the League of Nations. And that granted, basically, it put the wording of the Balfour Declaration, meaning the, you know, the connection between the Jewish people and the reconstitution of the Jewish national home in their ancestral homeland, and all that language that we saw first in the Balfour Declaration, again, into a legally binding resolution. And there's another part of that resolution that people, you know, tend to forget or prefer to forget. But another part of that resolution talks about the Jewish right to both immigrate to the land of Israel and settle in every part of the land. So if we are talking about 1920 or 1922, when this was accepted, you know, obviously then we talk about the entirety of the territory of the British Mandate. We can argue on the fact of whether it does or does not include Jordan, but for sure, it does include Jerusalem. It includes Judea and Samaria, the Jordan Valley, or what some would like to refer to as the West Bank. So this is one thing, and I think it's good enough because there was never any other legal resolution that is legally binding that came after that either revokes this right that was given to the Jewish people or changes that in any way, shape, or form. So that is still valid. You know, if we talk about United Nations General Assembly resolutions, those are all non-binding. Those are all political resolutions. Those have a political nature and not a legal nature. Now we can argue about that, why and how, and I can explain to you the history of the United Nations versus the Charter of the League of Nations, but it doesn't matter. That's just the way it is. That's a fact. So nothing has ever changed those rights that were given to the Jewish people by a legally binding resolution in 1922. There's another, I think, one of the most important legal arguments that was first raised by Professor Eugene Kontorovich and Avi Bell about a Latin principle in international law. I don't want to confuse you with Latin, but I'll just say it once. Uti possidetis iuris. That's the general idea. And why is that an important rule? Because it was used numerous times in the 19th and 20th century, which really I think goes to show you how important it is. And what does that mean? It means that when there's a situation of decolonization or the breakup of an empire or any, you know, this type of a situation, it really kind of changes the situation on the ground, then there is to favor stability and peace, the most important thing is that the emerging state has the right to inherit the previously existing borders. Okay, so this was used in South America, all over South America. It was used even in the break of Yugoslavia, in many cases in Africa and Eastern Europe after the breakup of the Soviet Union. So basically, if we try to see how that applies to our case, you know, once the British mandate was terminated, the British left. There was only one state that emerged from that situation, the State of Israel, the Declaration of Israeli Independence, meaning that international law grants this newly established state the right to inherit the exact borders of the pre-existing entity. So again, I mean, if you look at the map, this is where the borders of the British mandates were, where today the state of Jordan begins, or our border with the state of Jordan. And of course, the territory includes Judea, Samaria, Jordan Valley, and Jerusalem. So I think those are the two main arguments that we have. There are others, but it's very important for each and every one of us to know at least those two.
Now, when we speak about sovereignty, can you please explain what on an international law level is happening when Israel applies sovereignty to Judea and Samaria?
What happens in terms of international law? Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question, because if you ask my opinion, nothing. Because if you have the right for something, then you have the right, and then your own democracy needs to decide what to do with it. And your democracy can agree to waive some of those rights, or to give away some of those rights, or to actualize you know, sovereignty in the entirety of the territory. So that, according to international law, what should happen. Again, I'm not talking about politics, you know, diplomatic issues, different problems, whatever you want to tell me, that there are security issues that, okay, that's a different conversation. And this is what is important for me to say here. That's a different conversation. I mean, every argument is valid and legitimate, but it's not a legal argument, okay? So in terms of international law, nothing. It doesn't change anything. If you know what I mean? If the fact that the state of it, the government of Israel, you know, since 1967 until today, decided that they should wait until the political conditions are ripe to do, you know, one thing or another with those territories, doesn't mean in any moment in time did we concede on our natural legal rights to those territories. So again, it's not a question of is it wise, but you're asking me, is it legal? At 100%.
So one question I have for you is that we heard a lot about Pompeo's declaration that settlements were actually legal under international law. Can you please explain to us what what he changed in American policy, what was the case before this declaration and what was after?
Yes, this is a funny story, and of course when I say funny I mean tragic, but you know, in Jewish history we have to laugh, so I refer to it as a funny story. But back in the 70s, during the Carter administration, there was an opinion, a memorandum by one of his advisors, Hensel, and this is the only document, formal document that was ever written in the history of the United States relationship with Israel about the legality of the territory or Israeli possession of the territory. Now, Jimmy Carter, I don't know if you guys are aware of how nice, you know, how big of a friend he was to the Jewish state, but you know, there was a problem there. And to be perfectly honest, and I've spoken to a lot of people about this, people completely and totally forgot about the existence of this Hensel memorandum until Barack Obama kind of raised it from the dead to justify Resolution 2334 in the Security Council, which was his parting gift to Israel in the Security Council before he left office. And I remember I was shocked. Where did this even come from? And when we started kind of researching this, we found out the story as I just told you, that people just, you know, totally forgot about it. No one thought that this would, that this is the formal policy of the United States. Obviously, in between, we had the Oslo Accords. I mean, Bill Clinton got a Nobel Peace Prize for a completely different policy. So obviously, no one thought that this is still valid. So I think it was very important. I think for the next administration, for the Trump administration, to get that revoked, because obviously that wasn't their position, nor was it anyone else's position. Again, like other than Carter or Obama at the very end of his term. So they revoked the Hensel resolution. There's another piece of paper somewhere that no one apparently has seen. So I don't know to tell you exactly what it says or if that document really exists. But as far as we know, in terms of official policy, it was a very important step to revoke that Hensel opinion and go back to at least a more neutral position on that. And of course, again, the Trump peace plan kind of, you know, portrays a different understanding of Israel's legal rights and what can be a more reasonable or feasible solution to this conflict.
I want to ask one last question before we get to the questions we got from the crowd. The International Criminal Court, we know that one of the fears, or really one of the things that people say to scare Israel, is that if you apply sovereignty, then you might find yourself prosecuted in the International Criminal Court. What do you answer to that?
Well, I really try not to laugh, and I'll tell you why. Because this whole thing about Israel maybe extending its sovereignty or applying its law to certain parts of Area C is new, while the whole investigation is not at all new. Trust me, I have a lot of white hair because of that investigation. I spent many hours on that craziness. So, you know, we were extremely concerned about the politicization of the ICC way before we even thought that, you know, this current government might actually extend sovereignty to some of Area C. So, you know, so it is another, it's a twisted way to understand the development of events when you think you know, this problem was just born now. You know, so I wrote an op-ed once that titled, will Israel be prosecuted in the ICC if it extends its sovereignty? Yes. Will Israel be prosecuted in the ICC if it doesn't extend sovereignty? Yes.
Right. Okay, so we'll get now to questions from the crowd. I'll try to get through as many as we got a lot of questions. So we'll try to get in the time that we have through as many as we can. and then afterwards we'll go on to our next speaker. So the first question from Hugh Kitson, who asks, there are some lawyers, for example, Malcolm Shaw, who believes that uti possidetis juris doesn't apply to Israel. How would you counter this argument?
Well, you know, I completely disagree with that, and I would have to see what's the argument that Malcolm uses to say that it doesn't apply to Israel. I think that you know, people say that because we as the state of Israel, of course, not we personally, but since the state of Israel hasn't made that argument, you know, you know, from the beginning, then you know we're silenced forever from making that argument. I think that you know, there are some scenarios, like for example, criminal proceedings, where that might be true. But in this type of situation where, you know, this is the situation is so different, and you know, it was so challenging politically, then you know, I think if we had more time, I would have explained what was the mindset and what was the process of thought. When you know, when no one thought to really like build a legal case back in 1967, no one thought that was, you know, even that it even matters. I mean, everyone thought that, you know, this is something that we will try to leverage until we can get some kind of a peace agreement with the Arab neighboring countries. No one thought about the Palestinians back then. It wasn't even an issue. No one negotiated anything to do with the Palestinians. And the world was different. I mean, obviously, we didn't have civil society as active as we have today. We didn't have the ICC, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that argument, and that's the only argument I know, by the way. I don't know any legal argument that will actually convince me that uti possidetis juris doesn't apply. Just to say Israel is silent because it didn't make it in 1967, I think it's crap.
So from Paul Kaplan, we stayed mostly legal. Now I think it's a little bit of a political question. In your opinion, what should become regarding the status of the Arab Palestinians when sovereignty is applied to certain areas of Judea and Samaria?
Well, I think it's a good question, but I don't think it is a relevant question to the current situation, because you know, the Israeli government, whether we agree with it or not, or from whatever side, is not even talking about applying a sovereignty to the entirety of the area C, not to mention A or B. So we're talking about some percentage, I don't know, it changes every day, but mainly, but only over Jewish communities, and not even all Jewish communities, but some Jewish communities. So basically it doesn't change the legal status or any type of circumstances at all for the Arabs living in those areas. So it will be the same for them tomorrow as it is today. So it's just, I think it's not relevant.
Okay, another question. Sorry, 1 second. From Michael Goodman, who asked, why was Israel's right to exist contested even during the period between 48 and 67, when Israel had very confined borders? I think what he's trying to say is, what was the other side arguing on a legal basis?
I think he's trying to say that it shows the hypocrisy of whoever is now claiming, it's similar to the argument I have about the ICC. You know, they were going to do this for other reasons before we even thought of applying sovereignty. So, I mean, yes, we are a thorn on their side, if I'm being nice, and they have been trying to destroy Israel in any means possible. So you know, the war in 67 didn't change any of that.
Right. Steve Feldman is asking, why are so many Jewish groups aggressively denying the land is ours and Jews have a legal right to Judea and Samaria? It's not a very legal question, but if you want to speak.
You know what, I want to say something about that. Maybe that's not what Steve meant, but I want to say this. Like, I think that we are responsible for what we are now experiencing around the world. Maybe not 100%, because there are the anti-Semites and there is, you know, a very powerful Arab lobby and a lot of money involved, but we were silent for so many decades on our own legitimacy and our own rights. So this is how I prefer to look at the world in any issue and on any issue, is look at yourself and see how you can take responsibility and what you can do better. So I think I'm trying to do better by, you know, doing these type of webinars and writing and doing, and you're trying to do better by, you know, joining and taking. So I think we're now doing a lot better than we ever did in 50 plus years. So that's it. We should do more of that.
There is one question from Andrea Spindle, which I think really summarizes a lot of things that we heard here today. It seems that international law isn't international at all. I want to add, it seems that international law isn't law at all. You said that in the beginning. How many countries actually recognize it? How many countries actually work according to international law?
Well, I think countries work according to international law when it suits their interests, and don't work according to when it doesn't. I mean, just look at, you know, it would take me hours to even name all of the problems, but, you know, look at the situation and just look at what is happening now with the Kurds. I mean, look at Turkey's attack on the Kurds, and the world is silent. And look at the, you know, the major countries have major territories, including European countries. I mean, the UK has 14 different colonies still, if you will, areas under their control. It's a world of hypocrisy. That's, I mean, unfortunately, that's the case.
Great. So thanks a lot, Aoife. It was really fascinating. And also it helped us get many tools in order to afterwards defend sovereignty from a legal perspective. I'm going to let Mark introduce our next speaker. So Mark, back to you.
Dan, I'm going to say something with your permission.
Okay.
We have a whole segment on our website that is now dedicated to educating people on this issue. So we have a legal analysis, we have a Q&A segment, we have a few videos, and there will be more and more materials. So everyone is welcome to use it, take it. If you want to use it with your own logo, just email me. I'll send you a clean draft. Just use it and start talking about this. I think it's incredibly strategic for us to do it now. All right. So share with them the address for the website, and thank you so much. This was great, and good luck with everything.
Thank you, Aoife. Mark, you're on mute.
Okay, Dan, you hearing me? Okay, so Dan, you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Okay, Aoife, thank you very much. That was terrific. It's important that we have strong spokespeople like yourself. The ZOA, as you know, we often find ourselves marching as a lone drummer, even though we've been right in so many issues. And, you know, what you say is terrific. We've put out a lot of our own materials on this, and I foresee as we look to partner and collaborate with other like-minded organizations and individuals, we look forward to working with you. And we hope when this pandemic ends, when you're next in the States, we'd love to have you speak at our New York headquarter office when our offices, you know, when the world opens up. So really terrific, thank you. It's really inspiring to hear other folks that really understand the legitimacy of our claims and can present it so articulately like you just did. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, my pleasure.
We're gonna switch gears for the next half hour. We have a hard stop. Our MK, Chaver Knesset, has to break at 12:35 sharp. So Sharren Haskel, hopefully she's on. I'm not seeing her, but hopefully she's on. Alan and Natalie. Sharren.
Mark?
Yes?
Mark, this is Alan. We're waiting for her to log on. There's one more question that perhaps you can ask Aoife if she's still on,
Well,
while
then
we're waiting
ahead.
for her to log on.
No, that's
Sure.
great. So you mean Ken's question?
There you go.
Okay, our good friend Ken Abramowitz. I'm going to give him the credit for this question. Do you? I don't even know where your answer will go. Do you have enough resources to sue all the Muslim countries except Saudi Arabia for their illegal occupation of Christian countries during the past 1,400 years? Wow.
Yeah, hi Ken. I think it's a great question. The problem is, and again, it shows how, rigged in a way the system is, because there is no, there isn't a venue for us to do that. If you wanna, even if you wanna go against Syria now for what's going on in against the Kurds or anything else, there's nothing that you can do. There is no suitable forum in the world. So when we say that the ICC is incredibly politicized, that's exactly the reason. I mean, out of all the atrocities and all the wars and all the genocides and all the occupations around the world, they choose to go after the one Jewish state. So I wish there was, Ken, because this would have been a worthy cause maybe, or there are other worthy causes. But again, international law doesn't give you the proper forum for that.
Okay, thank you. I understand that our second speaker is on, so please, Aoife, feel free to stay on as long as you can or want. So terrific job. Our second speaker is Chaver Knesset, Sharren Haskel. Sharren is a deputy speaker of the Knesset. She was born in Toronto, Canada, which for you, the rest of you, is different from Montreal, where Dan was from. She and her family immigrated to Israel in 1985. Sharren enlisted in the IDF in the Border Guard, serving in Jerusalem during the Second Intifada, and she finished with the rank of First Sergeant. She entered the Knesset at the really young age of 31. Her work in the Knesset focuses on free market-oriented economic reforms and what we think is most important, defending Israel on the international stage. She's become one of Israel's most eloquent spokespersons for Israel's rights, both within Israel and internationally. So Sharren, welcome to ZOA's webinar, and we're delighted to have you, and we hope you'll be a regular with us. I am going to start off with the first question, and we know you have a hard stop at 12:35, so we'll be mindful of that in terms of my questioning and trying to get in some chat questions. And there are a lot of chat questions and participants on the line. So the first question, please tell us, as of today, Israel time, what is the latest on the sovereignty status? Many of us saw last night after Shabbat, we saw a number of articles. We don't know whether it's true or not, about legislation or relative to the coalition being submitted, and the infamous point 29 being deleted or not deleted, and that affecting whether Prime Minister Netanyahu really has the sole say on moving forward with sovereignty, or whether somehow alternate Prime Minister Gantz has, the right of consent as well. So please talk to us about that, what you know as of right now on that issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and it's such a pleasure to see you all, and that you're keeping in touch and informed on everything that's happening in Israel, even though all the challenges, the health one, the economical one, and the traveling one as well to Israel. I'm here always. I'm more than happy to participate in your events, obviously, face-to-face and also on Zoom as well. So I'll touch first the issues concerning sovereignty in Israel and the application of it as soon as possible. There's two aspects for that, the technical part of it and the political side of it. On the technical side of it, yesterday also we've tried to pass through some takanon, which is sort of like a rules of government, sort of to say, of the coalition principles on what we are going to advance in the next few years. It didn't pass, but obviously, in order to actually apply sovereignty, we need the decision of the Prime Minister. This is the most key important in that. If he choose and decide to do that, we'll be able to do that within weeks, not months. So on the technical side, obviously, we formed a coalition with partners that disagree with us on ideological issues, not just sovereignty, on issues of economy, on issues of many different issues, on the court system in Israel, the law enforcement in Israel. So we're very, very different. There's quite a lot of clashes on a lot of these issues between us. It's not easy. This is not the coalition that we've expected or that we actually wanted. But we had to compromise. And in that compromise, we have a coalition agreement where I can tell you on the political aspect of it, we were not very happy with. The only thing that sort of kept us going through with a coalition that we're not happy with is the promise for sovereignty in July. Now, on the technical part, with those coalition agreements, they have to abide by them and they have to agree to sovereignty. There is no question about it. So technically, it is at the hand of the Prime Minister, with saying a lot of technical difficulties that we need to resolve. The political aspect of it is that us in the Likud party, in particular me, I've already voiced it in many interviews and passed it on to whoever needed to hear that. And I can tell you that I am not alone. We will not stay in this coalition if there will not be sovereignty. We definitely are having many challenges that we need to face and that we need to overcome that came with the coronavirus. And we are not ignoring this. But we have our voters, we have promises for our voters. And the only ideological, let's say, term that we insisted on in those coalition agreement and giving up a lot of what we've promised was sovereignty. And so me, with many more of the Likud members, have passed it on that we will not stay in a coalition where there will not be sovereignty. So there's political pressure going on the Prime Minister as well, not just from the party, from us, not just from the public, but also from the international community as well. I think it was a week ago, some leaders in the Christian community as well wrote a couple of articles and a couple of letters saying that they demand also that Israel will go through with sovereignty. So I'm hopeful, and I hope that within a few weeks we'll be able to apply it.
That's terrific. As you know, ZOA has a very active campaign. Hopefully you saw our wonderful billboards.
Amazing billboards. And it
Exciting.
reminds every morning and every evening anyone that leaves or come into Jerusalem, into the Knesset, what our mission is.
Yeah, so I want to, thank Dan, our Israel office representative. Dan was very helpful in that, and Natalie and others on the on our marketing communications end. We actually have a sovereignty campaign steering committee that we meet weekly to discuss all these issues, because this is incredibly important to ZOA. We know we're the only organization that's really, leading the charge here, but we feel very strongly about it. We are concerned about timing. So I did want to ask you briefly alluded to it, but ultimately when the coalition was formed, Gans came in really with very few seats relative. We know that that was the deal that was needed, and to get the current government in place, but he really did have a limited number of seats. Polls, which are only polls, continue to show that the Prime Minister and Likud are, very, very trending upward in the polls, shall I say. So we want to kind of give you a little bit of chizuk and maybe ask you to comment back on the fact that if there's much more efforts by whomever outside of Likud to push back even in the coalition, what are the possibilities of moving to a dreaded next election? Because this is such a critical issue and there is a time element to it.
So I wouldn't really count on polls here in Israel. It's very rare that they can actually predict, especially when there's not even a political campaign well ahead of what the results are going to be. we need to look on the past. And the fact was that we were not able to form a coalition by ourselves. We could not form a right-wing coalition. This is what we aspired for. This is what we wanted. It would have given us a chance to make some incredible changes here in Israel that were very much needed for the past 30 years, historical changes. But unfortunately, we didn't win these elections. The understanding of the crisis that was coming forced us to build a coalition that we were not happy with. The positions that our ministers were not happy with that either. Some of the legislations, we are encountering a lot of issues, a lot of problems. There's a lot of difficulties. But we did insist, as I said before, on sovereignty. And we're, at least I'm pushing forward, and I'm telling you straight up, we're not afraid of elections. The public is expecting us to stand on our ideological promises as well. And if we can't keep, out of many election promises, this one single promise that we promised to keep in the coalition agreement, we will not be afraid to go into elections.
Okay, good. I want to take a little brief right turn here, a left turn, because I want our participants on this webinar, and we've just had a tremendous series of webinars throughout this whole pandemic. We mentioned it at the top of the program here. And there are so many people on this webinar that may really not know you. So why don't you take 5 minutes, tell us about your path. You've done quite a bit in your short lifetime so far. So talk to us about Toronto to where we are today in the Knesset. Fit it all in 5 minutes.
Oh, wow.
Take 6.
Yeah. I was born in Canada to an Israeli father and a Moroccan mother, a newcomer from France. They've fled from Morocco to France. I was raised here in Israel since the age of 1. I've got family, though, all around the world. So my dad lives in Canada, my sister's in Texas, my grandmother's in France, cousins all around Europe. So it's easy for me to connect with the Jewish community all around the world and to be part of that bridge between the younger Jewish community and between Israel. That's why I've been chosen on many delegations to come and represent Israel, to come and do also, even with the ZOA, a campus tour all around. I think it was 5 days with 6 or 7 campuses. All around, which was amazing, to try and combat anti-Semitism and BDS organizations and things like that. So growing up here in Israel was very important for me to fulfill a position, an important position in the army. I joined as in a combat position in the border guards of Israel. It's called Magav in Hebrew. I was a commander as well. I'm very proud to have some of my female rookies basically breaking some glass ceilings in special units, in special places, things like that. I was able to push them further as well. After my military service, I moved to Australia. I've studied there my profession. I lived there for 7 years. It's a very important profession in Israeli politics. I'm a veterinary nurse. So I worked in an animal hospital. Some may say that I arrived in the real zoo of Israel, the Israeli parliament. After 7 years in Australia, I moved back to Israel. I finished my degree in international relations at the Open University of Israel. I've became more and more active politically. I never thought I will end up in politics, but I started becoming more and more involved. My family didn't really have a connection or anything to that, to the political life. So I really started from being a normal active in my branch of Likud and in my university cells. And I started voicing a bit of a different voice. So I speak, and most of my legislation also today in the Knesset speaks about economical freedom. The capitalistic more approach, less bureaucracy, less regulations, less taxes. Israel is one of the most complicated places to do business. Some extremely high tax rates for us. Many times the government is getting involved in entrepreneurship, in small businesses, in a way that it actually prevent us, the younger generation, to continue and develop Israel economy from an economical perspective, to create more companies and develop them. And so I've been a unique voice for the past 5 years on those issues. I come from a very strict and a very clear right-wing approach about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. As well, I sit in the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, and I represent it almost every single day. The committee is one of the most important committees in Israel. And over there, I found some of my talents in foreign relations as well, and bringing Israel's agenda and Israel's interest into the front line of international community, conventions, delegations, things like that. So that's like in a really brief, nutshell.
Okay, thank you. Well, for those that don't know, the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee in Knesset may actually be the most important committee. And it's also terrific to see some new, younger, fresher faces in Likud, because, we do need to have youth and combined experience as we go forward. Let me ask you one more question for myself, and we have a whole bunch of questions in the chat room, and so we'll try to turn to that. I know you have the hard stop. So one of the challenges that we ZOA face, that, you see it, we really are the lone voice, the lone major voice. I mean, there are other organizations, good organizations that do speak out, but in terms of having, a presence and a response from the media and the Jewish community at large, ZOA is really the most significant organization that is really pushing the sovereignty issue and other issues like that. We are very frustrated that we cannot get other major Jewish organizations involved. We're equally frustrated that we can't get the Jewish community at large, who refuse to accept the fact that Israel has a legal right. I could go through our 13 points in our sovereignty bulletin. I'm not going to do that. People who have seen it, they can look it up. But from your perspective in Israel, where you're really on the front line there, how do you see the issue? How do you see trying to convey to so many Jewish organizations, even if they don't feel and agree with our positions totally, at least, give Israel a break? Why do you have to be so offensive? Why can't you say, okay, we may disagree, but we agree that Israel has a right to do so? So what ideas or thoughts do you have, and what frustration do you have when you speak to various groups?
Yeah, I mean, it is frustrating, and it is a challenge that we need to face as a Jewish community as well. We have disagreements here in Israel on those issues as well, and we fight with the opposition constantly. I had a meeting last week with WUJA, so World Jewish Students Organizations. And they were asking me many difficult questions exactly like that. And I think the most important thing is the conversation. Explaining them, at an eye level, what it actually means. Explaining them some facts that they are really not aware of, because there is so much really misleading information on the internet about our history, about the geography, about the economy, about the ruling system here in Israel. So to be honest, they're really misinformed. And the most important thing is to send out information about it, real statistics, real documents about what's really happening here. Another thing that I actually told them, which is important, is that the Jewish community is an incredible and a very valuable and it's part of Israel, okay? And it's very important that we have all these discussions because obviously this affects the Jewish community as well. But at the end of the day, the people who will have to live or die by the results of Israel's action is Israelis. And those who come to Israel, and there's many from the Jewish community, from the left and the right, who come to Israel to volunteer, to work, to make their life here, it's okay, and they can make the decisions as well. We have democratic elections. This issue is on the table constantly. Anyone who put, you know, a right wing, a Likud petek, a Likud
Sticker, campaign sticker?
yeah, campaign sticker in the ballot, exactly. They know that they vote for sovereignty as well. And so if you're here in Israel and you participate in the elections, it's your decisions as well, because the results, you're going to have to live by it as well. So it's okay to have the discussion and to share this information and even to have arguments. It's absolutely okay. But at the end of the day, the decisions is the Israelis' people decision. And we've done that for more than 70 years. Even though the international community did not support Israel on so many issues, they tried to describe some kind of doomsday event just because we'll put sovereignty in the Golan Heights, or even bring the embassy, the American embassy, to Jerusalem. And you know what? It didn't come true. On this issue, I believe it will not come true as well. But what's important is that me, my family, my parents, and my children will have to live by that decision. And this is what I keep in my mind. And that's what they have to keep in their mind as well. When they are calling for me to support a two-state solution, a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria, they don't understand, but obviously in different meetings I'm explaining that they are putting my children and my family at risk of every single day having missiles being shot from Kilkilia to Kfar Saba, my hometown, okay? And the results of the actions that they want me to do put a risk on my family and my future kids with God's help. So I think it's important to put that in that kind of context.
Okay, that's terrific. Let me, mindful of the time, I'm going to turn to our chat room and we'll try to get through as many questions as possible within the next, 6 or 7 minutes. I know you have to break. So from our own terrific Steve Feldman, who runs our Philadelphia office, the Israel media, and I know some of these you've touched upon a little bit, but the Israel media seems determined to convince the Israeli public that extending sovereignty is wrong, and they keep referring to it as annexation, which at ZOA we do not, reasserting sovereignty. Can the Knesset do anything about it? What is being done to make sure the public knows the facts?
So, obviously, politicians don't control the media. And it's good, and they have a lot of criticism over us. And obviously, most of the journalists, all journalists have sort of their own thoughts and their own perspective of life and their own ideology. There isn't a single individual, definitely not reporters, who come on a mission to report and inform the public with their own ideology, political grasps, or political opinions and things like that. Unfortunately, yes, I think it's sort of similar also in America, but most of the journalists here in Israel hold a more left-wing approach, and they're not afraid to voice it in the media as well. On social media, in the mainstream media, time after time, they are doing that. I think that most Israeli and most right-wing are starting to have new coming channels. So there's Channel 20 that many of them have moved to, not enough, but some of them. We have social media to keep them informed as well. We have a couple of radio stations and radio anchors that people are more and more listening to them, at least from our camp. And I think that some of it is definitely our fault as well. I mean, for years and years, we haven't pushed our sort of elite intellectual right-wing layer towards NGOs, towards the media, towards academic. And the left wing had so many organizations and donations to acquire for them the right education or the right programs in order to move those people from the left wing into those positions. And to be honest, we weren't smart enough to do that as well, and we don't do that as well as they do. It's changing. There's different programs. For example, just last week, I had a speech at the final graduation of a campus called the Campus for Identity and המכללה לזהות ומדינאות. It's difficult for me to translate it. But this, for example, is a program that gives the tools to many intellectuals in the right wing as well, the tools to go and start a career in that path as well. We have to do that more and more. We have to support right-wing organizations that can give that kind of tools and facilities for the right-wing intellectual elite to continue and develop themselves in the country, in the nation's sort of institutes.
Okay, I'm going to squeeze in two questions to you. You can answer them both. I know we're running up against the clock, so let me just say the first question is, we've talked a lot about, Likud views on the sovereignty issue. What's your sense that you want to convey about what the population outside, the Israel population outside of the Likud and the right wing feel about sovereignty? That's one. And the other one, we talked a little bit about how important this is to Likud members such as yourself. Are there others like you that would bolt the coalition, that the coalition would break up over this issue if it just gets bogged down?
So to the second questions, absolutely yes. I speak to many members of the Likud party who are quite frustrated with it, and I'm sure they'll have they'll be brave enough to do and to put that in place as well. The first question, I didn't exactly understood it.
The issue in America, the Jews are more than split on this issue. In Israel, there still is a split on the issue of sovereignty. And so we wanted your sense, since we have the media, which is basically left wing, and we have very vocal.
In Israel or in America?
Israel.
Okay.
How would you convey the general population's view on the sovereignty issue?
So how Israelis view the sovereignty?
Yeah.
I would say that right now the general discussion is more about economical issues than the health issues. And sovereignty have somewhat come down in the general public discussion, unfortunately. But we have, not an easy challenge right now with the rise in the infected in coronavirus. And so that's what's playing on the minds of Israelis. That's what we're discussing. That's the general discussions in the parliament as well and in the media. I believe that within 2 weeks, 3 weeks, we'll be able to resolve most of it and continue to speak about those issues. And I believe that this will be one of the major issues that will be discussed.
Okay, I appreciate that.
I can take another question as well.
Great. Okay, terrific. I'm going to, there are so many terrific questions here. Let me pull up one from Cheryl Silver. And this will be the last question, then I want to thank you for participating. Cheryl asks, are public warnings by France, good question, are public warnings by France, Germany, Jordan, and Egypt of negative consequences in their relationships with Israel if Israel asserts sovereignty, is that having any impact, in your view, on the Prime
That's
Minister.
a great question. Really good question. I get asked that a lot. Now, it's important to understand the process that are happening right now around the Middle East. For a couple of years now, we have been building bridges with many countries in the Arab world, some official and some non-official as well. Those bridges are being constructed with them, including Egypt and Jordan, despite our disagreement on the Palestinian issues. So many people will say, you know, I'm not going, Israel will never have peace in the region if Israel will not solve the Palestinian issue. Well, we have. We've made a peace agreement with Egypt without resolving the Palestinian issue. We've signed a peace agreement with Jordan without signing without resolving the Palestinian issue. We've been building bridges based on mutual security interest, on mutual economical interest with those countries who no one thought will ever have relationship with, not just without resolving the Palestinian problem, but during speaking about sovereignty, during the time of applying the Declaration of America about the Golan Heights, during moving the embassy of the United States to Jerusalem. It is not a question of whether those ties are going to break off. It's a matter in their world of respect. They see how we stand our ground. They see that we are good allies, that we will not let them down. Saying facts, you know, just a few years ago, one of their greatest friends let them down by signing an agreement with one of their main enemies. And they see Israel as a strong, sovereign country in the middle of a very difficult question with a lot of power, with a lot of knowledge, and they want to share it. And it's interesting, you know, there was a remark that obviously there's a lot of people and journalists that are speaking and saying, oh, how will the Arab world will stay in touch with Israel after sovereignty? So some of them speak about it. One of the ambassadors of the United Arab Emirates spoke in one of the European magazines saying that we disagree with Israel on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, and we definitely oppose sovereignty. Now that's okay, we can disagree. We'd still disagree with Jordan, we still disagree with Egypt. It's incredible because after this declaration, many left-wing reporters have celebrated, you know, what they predict is right. But it was incredible to see not an ambassador, but the foreign minister of the Arab Emirates coming with an incredible declaration saying, that ambassador is right. We disagree with Israel on sovereignty and on the Palestinian issues, but it doesn't mean we cannot cooperate on the coronavirus, on security issues, on economical issues. And that's from the foreign minister. Never heard something like that before, okay? And so we need to understand that the Arab world have to speak in one voice outside, but to Israel it speaks in a completely different way. And sovereignty will only strengthen the relationships with many of these countries. It will be able to build an economical, far and long-lasting future between us and those countries. Once we control completely and once we apply sovereignty in the Jordan Valley, investors can come and start to invest long-term in the economy in this area. I mean, there's so many things that we can develop and do. Beside that, what we are seeing happening with Iran, with Syria, with Lebanon, some of our enemies, definitely one that would have reply on a matter of sovereignty, well, they have their own challenges to answer to them right now. They are going through one of the worst economical crises that they've seen. People have absolutely no way to buy food right now. The value of their coins is dropping every single day. I think the Iranian coin have dropped, it was 20% or something. The Lebanese coin, I think it's almost at 50% decline. I mean, it's crazy what's happening there. And the voices on the street, they know they cannot blame Israel. For the first time, for example, Hezbollah, they're trying to say it's because of Israel, but they know it's not. And for the first time, the Lebanese people are going out in the streets and calling for the disarmament of Hezbollah in Lebanon, which is never heard before. You hear reporter speaking about Israel openly, friendly. So, you know, all of these doomsday scenarios that those left-wing reporters are trying to spread, it didn't happen before. I don't believe they will happen in the future as well.
Okay, thank you. We're gonna leave that. There are so many other questions here. You've been terrific. I just want to say to our group at large out there that unfortunately, because of the coronavirus, we did cancel our summer campus trips to Israel, very unfortunately. We still are looking forward to hopefully in February, late February, having our annual ZOA VIP mission as we've had the last several years. And we know we're gonna have you speak to us as one of our lead speakers. And you know, Howard Katzoff, I believe, is on the webinar. He's one of our primary cogs, and to everyone on the webinar, he's one of the primary cogs in getting that Israel trip going. So if you're interested, you know, we know the corona is not done yet, but folks on the webinar should reach out to Howard so we can start to gear people's interest, even though we know there's a long way off. We also, when corona opens up, when finishes or tamps down, we really look very much forward to having you as well as Yifa in separate presentations at our New York headquarters. We have beautiful offices in Midtown Manhattan, which will one day reopen publicly. And we very much encourage having you join us. You're a terrific spokesman, not only for Likud, but also for Israel and the issues that are very, very dear to us. So we thank you very, very much for being with us. And we hope you and your family do well.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to meet you and see you all. And I'll definitely be more than happy to participate in any event that you have, especially your yearly one. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, everyone else in the webinar, we got a few extra minutes here. We went over our sort of committed 1 hour timeline, but most people stayed with us. So again, on behalf of ZOA, on behalf of our senior staff and Alan and Natalie and Mort Klein and everyone, we want to thank you very much for participating in this webinar. We have 2 great programs coming up this week. On Wednesday, we have book club number 13 with Ambassador Dory Gold. That's at 1 p.m. The link to register will be posted either in the chat or on our general ZOA website. And Thursday at 7 p.m., we have, quote, Pittsburgh, Stronger Than Hate, Anti-Israel Activists Weaponize University Against Jewish Professors. So we hope you'll sign up for those. And I hope everyone has a good day. And please keep ZOA in your heart and minds and pocketbooks. As you know, we've said, we've spent a lot of money on the sovereignty campaign. We feel it's well worth it. But you know, we do need to raise funds as we can so that we can move forward appropriately. I want to give folks back the rest of their afternoon on Sunday. I hope everyone stays well and healthy, and we'll see you all on our next ZOA webinar. Thank you, everyone. And thank you very much to Sharren and Yifa as well for the terrific job here. Have a good day, everyone.